So my first question is, Atma-vichara is about being, not doing. So it's confusing when I hear the word practice or when it sounds like it's a doing, because really Atma-vichara is being as we are.
Yes, but we are always as we are, but when we rise as ego, we seem to be engaged in doing. So being as we are means we have to subside back into our source. For that, we have to turn our attention back within. The more keenly our attention is turned within, that is towards ourself alone, the more ego will subside, and the closer we will come to the state of just being as we actually are. Yes, it is just being, but we have to practice just being, because we have habituated ourselves to not just being, but rising and doing.
Cool. Can you talk about pramāda?
Pramāda simply means negligence. The whole problem comes down to negligence. That is, the nature of ego is to be negligent about itself. The nature of ego, in other words, is to be always attending to things other than itself. And so long as it's attending to things other than itself, it's not aware of itself as it actually is. Because what we actually are, it means this ego means ourself. Not ourself as we actually are, but ourself as ego. So what we actually are is pure awareness, which means awareness that is not aware of anything other than itself. So there is no pramāda for pure awareness, for our real nature. But when we rise as ego, as I say, the nature of ego is to be always attending to things other than itself. Those things other than itself, all these names and forms, phenomena, whatever we choose to call them, they all exist only in the view of ourself as ego. When we don't rise as ego, there are no forms, no names, no phenomena, no objects, nothing. There is just the state of being as the pure awareness that we actually are. But as I say, the nature of ego is to attend to other things. When we attend to other things, we are neglecting ourselves. That is, instead of being aware of ourselves alone, we're aware of all these other things. And though we are always aware of ourselves as I am, that somehow goes into the background. That is, because of our lack of interest, we are so interested in knowing other things, but we lose interest in just being aware of ourselves. Being aware of ourselves means being aware just of I am, nothing other than I am. So that is pramāda. As I say, it's negligence. It means it implies self-negligence. We are neglecting ourselves, the fundamental awareness I am, and taking interest in so many other things. So long as we take interest in, so long as you take interest in Sean or I take interest in Michael, that is taking interest in something other than ourselves, because we are neither Sean nor Michael. What we actually are is just I am. As Bhagavan said, I am I.
I am I, or I am, or I am that I am, or just I am, or just I.
Yeah. But I mean, why Bhagavan said I am I? To identify with anything other than I is a false. We cannot be anything other than ourselves. So our true identity is only I and nothing other than I. And that he interpreted, that is the meaning of the biblical saying. When God revealed his identity, he said, I am that I am. Bhagavan interpreted that as meaning I am I.
Cool. And that's a big confusion in talks and other books, perhaps, as he says I. Yes, it's translated like that.
Yes. That's a mistranslation. People miss the point.
And I think in Guru Vachakakovai, I read at one point that Muruganar wrote that we shouldn't have pramāda even for like a second, basically.
No. There's a there's a Vedantic text called Sujatiyam. It's actually like the Bhagavad Gita, it's a part of the Mahabharata. In Sujatiyam, there's a very famous stanza in which it is said, pramāda is death. How is pramāda death? Because so long as we neglect to attend to ourselves alone, we die to our real nature, not literally, but metaphorically, we die to our real nature. That is, by rising as ego, we are limiting our infinite, ourself, the one infinite Satchidananda, the existence, awareness, and happiness. We are limiting that as this small person. And as this small person, our existence is limited. We were born at such and such a time, we're going to die at such and such a time. Our knowledge is limited, our awareness is limited. I know only these things. I'm ignorant of so many other things. And our happiness is limited. That is, we experience iotas of happiness here and there, but there's a general underlying dissatisfaction. So that is why pramāda is death, because it is Bhagavan sometimes used to say, when people ask, why does ego rise? Bhagavan said, avichara. Avichara means non-vichara. Non-vichara is the same as pramāda. That is not attending to ourselves. But though Bhagavan said that, we shouldn't take it literally, but that is the cause. Because what is not attending to itself is only ego. So there cannot be a pramāda is the nature of ego. There cannot be a pramāda that precedes ego. Because if pramāda could precede ego, if self-forgetfulness or self-negligence could precede ego, that would imply that our real nature, Brahman, is self-forgetful. That can never be. So pramāda is the nature of ego. When we are trying to turn our attention back within, we are going against the nature of ego, but that is our real nature. Our real nature is to be aware of nothing other than ourselves.
And what's confusing a little bit for me is when you get used to practice as just being, then when we talk about turning within, we recognize that really there's no within and there's no without. And also it's a bit confusing when we talk about others, because what is other?
In terms of practice, within means facing ourselves alone, attending to ourselves alone. Everything else is extraneous to us, external to us, in that sense. I mean, obviously, when we talk of within and without, they're terms that will have different meanings in different contexts. But in the context of this practice of Atma-vichara, within means what is within is only ourself. Everything else is outside. And of course, these are relative terms. Within and without has a meaning only so long as we see all this multiplicity. When for our real nature, there is neither within nor without, because nothing other than itself exists. But when we rise as ego, we see all this multiplicity. So long as we are aware of anything other than ourselves, we are facing outwards. That means away from ourselves. So we need to face back within. That means towards ourselves.
And is that multiplicity other than us?
We are the substance. But so long as we see multiplicity, it seems to be other than us, because we are one. And we see all these many things.
One without a second.
Yes, yes. So though Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Everything means everything that is perceived, everything that is known, everything other than ourselves. So, and then he says, ego itself is everything. What's he mean by ego itself is everything? That is, we alone exist. So we are the substance that appears as all this. When you're dreaming, for example, it seems that there's a world outside, but you're a particular body, a small body in a big world. and the world seems to be outside of you and seems to exist independent of you, or so you assume so long as you're dreaming, because it all seems real. Because you take the dream body as yourself, what is actually real in a dream is only you. But you take, in your experience, this dream body is yourself. So long as you experience that dream body as yourself, the dream body seems to be real, and consequently the world seems to be real. And consequently the world seems to exist independent of your perception of it. When you wake up, your identification with that dream body is terminated, it's severed. You no longer experience that dream body as yourself. As soon as you cease experiencing that dream body as yourself, you're automatically able to recognize, oh, it was just a dream. And we all know a dream is just something, a mental fabrication. It exists only in our mind. So what is the substance of the dream world? And all the things we see in that dream world, the substance is only our own mind. We are seeing, our own mind is seeing itself as all these many things. In that sense, Bhagavan says, ego is everything. Ego is the substance that appears as all this.
And then as another person you recently interviewed mentioned, after that, there's ajāta, and there was really just a dream and a dreamer, and that is illusory, and really it's just what is always present is what really is.
Yes, yes. But in ajāta, there are no dreams. There's no dreamer. There's no coming into being or no ceasing to be. There is what is. Ajāta is our own natural state. But so long as we rise as ego, the rising of ego and consequently the rising of all other things seems to be, there seems to be a rising. So Advaita says it's all just a false appearance. It's not real. It's no more real than the snake you see in a rope. What is real is only the rope. There's no snake there at all, but the snake seems to exist. Likewise, ego and all these phenomena, they seem to exist. But Bhagavan asks a crucial question: in whose view do they all seem to exist? Only in the view of ego. So if we investigate ego and find that there's no such thing as ego, if there's no such thing as ego, then there's nothing else. So the final, what our real state, our natural state, is the state of ajāta, the state in which there, even as a false appearance, this ego hasn't, and this ego and phenomena haven't come into existence.
And that relates to sṛṣṭi-dṛṣti-vada and dṛṣti-srishti-vada?
Well, dṛṣti-srishti-vada is what Bhagavan taught us. Why he taught us dṛṣti-srishti-vada and not ajāta? Because in ajāta, there is no ego, there's no world, there are no problems, and there's no one to be taught, and there's no one to teach. So ajāta is our final aim, but that is not Bhagavan's teaching. Because in order to give a useful teaching, Bhagavan first has to acknowledge that there's a problem. That is, in the state of ajāta, there's no problem at all, because nothing has ever appeared. But in our experience, there's a problem. We're dissatisfied, and there's so many problems life throws at us. So Bhagavan comes down to the level of dṛṣti-srishti-vada to acknowledge that there's a problem. But he in his analysis, the whole problem comes back to our rising as ego. Only when we rise as ego do all other things appear. So problems arise only with the rising of ego. So that is dṛṣti-srishti-vada. Without the rising of ego, there is nothing. So what Bhagavan says in verse 26, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That is pure dṛṣti-srishti-vada. From that, the logical conclusion of dṛṣti-srishti-vada, because Bhagavan said, all this seems to exist only in the view of ego. But if ego investigates itself, it will find itself to be just pure awareness, and as pure awareness, it is never aware of anything other than itself. In other words, there is no ego, no phenomena. That is the the logical conclusion of drishti-srishti-vada as taught by Bhagavan. However, the majority of, because most people assume that the world exists independent of our perception of it, if you take the world as being something that exists independent of your perception of it, that is sṛṣṭi-dṛṣti-vada. That is, srishti comes first. That is, first there's a world, however it came into existence, whether it was God in 7 days created the world, or whether it was a big bang, or whatever be the cause, the world existed before you came to see it. That is the view of drishti-srishti-vada. So almost all religious and scientific and philosophical accounts of the appearance of the world, or the origin of the world, all are forms of sṛṣṭi-dṛṣti-vada. They all assume that there's a creation or something has existed before we saw it. Even in Advaita, the majority of Advaitins are sṛṣṭi-dṛṣti-vadins. Why is that? Because that is, in most of the older texts, they make concessions to people's assumptions. So most of us assume the world exists independent of our perception of it. Almost all our beliefs are based on that, on the idea that the world exists out there independent of my perception of it. It was there before I was born. It will continue after I die. It's there even when I'm asleep. That is the so-called common sense view. Most people are not willing to give up that view. So Advaita makes a concession by giving an account of creation, but somehow reconciles all this being just an illusory appearance. And actually, there's only one thing. They try to reconcile that with people's view of multiplicity. But there are lots of logical problems you come up against if you're trying to reconcile these two extreme opposites. Philosophically, drishti-srishti-vada is a much simpler explanation. It's a much more elegant explanation. It's a much more parsimonious explanation. So if we believe in Occam's razor, if we believe that a parsimonious solution is always likely to be more is always more likely to be true than a complicated explanation, then drishti-srishti-vada provides the most parsimonious possible explanation. None of this actually exists. It exists only in the view of ego. So only when ego rises does all this come into existence. That's an extremely parsimonious metaphysics. So if generally there's an agreement among philosophers and scientists, but a simple explanation is more likely to be true than a complicated explanation. Because a simple explanation, you're making fewer assumptions. If any form of sṛṣṭi-dṛṣti-vada makes a fundamental assumption where the things that we perceive exist independent of our perception of it. So you're there making a huge assumption for which you can never find any adequate evidence. That is, you can never know that anything exists apart from your knowledge of it. So sṛṣṭi-dṛṣti-vada, whether it's sṛṣṭi-dṛṣti-vada as taught by Advaita, or as taught by theistic religions, or as taught by modern science or atheistic philosophers or whatever, it's all are making this fundamental assumption that the things we perceive exist independent of our perception of it. That is a very wild assumption, an assumption for which we can never have any evidence. So this is a much, philosophically, it's a much more robust solution. It's also, from a spiritual point of view, it's a much more practical solution. Because if everything depends upon me, my rising as ego, everything comes into existence, then obvious solution is that is, I am then the problem. The problem isn't out there. I am the problem. How do I deal with this problem? What is this ego? As ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body. Not always the same body. Now we experience this particular body as I. When we dream, we experience some other body as I. If this body dies and we have another birth, that's another dream, we'll experience some other body. Now you are Sean and I am Michael. In previous dreams, we would have had some other identity. So, so ego is nothing but this false identification of ourselves with a body. That identification of ourselves with the body it's false. Why? Because if this body were actually what we are, we couldn't be aware of ourselves without being aware of this body. But in dream, we are not, when we're dreaming, we're not aware of this body. We're aware of some other body as ourselves. This body is lying asleep on a bed, but we seem to be walking around, talking, doing so many activities. So we are aware of ourselves in sleep without being aware of this body. Therefore, simple logical, I mean, that's a logical proof, but we cannot be this body. It's, I mean, you can deductively prove, but if this body were ourselves, we couldn't be aware of ourselves without being aware of this body. Since we're aware of ourselves without being aware of this body in dream, therefore we're not this this body. So are we the dream body? No, now we're aware of ourselves without being aware of that dream body. But in both states, we seem to be aware of more or less the same mind. So does that mean we're the mind? No, because we're aware of this mind only in waking and dream. In sleep, we're not aware of any mind at all, but we are aware of ourselves. I slept. We're aware of our own existence in sleep. We're aware, we're in sleep, we are aware, what we are aware of in sleep is not anything other than ourselves. We're aware only of ourselves. We're aware of our mere being, our mere existence, I am. So since we can exist and be aware of our existence without being aware of anything else, nothing other than ourselves can be ourselves. So logically, we can prove that everything that we experience in waking and dream is based upon this false knowledge of ourselves as I am this body. When we don't experience ourselves as a body, we don't experience any world. So all our knowledge of other things is based upon a false knowledge, a knowledge of ourselves as I am this body. So since this knowledge of ourselves, I am this body, is false, if we investigate ourselves and know what we actually are, this ego will thereby be destroyed. And what will then remain is what is always there. That is the pure awareness that we actually are.
And that's an even simpler explanation, is I am is even simpler than, I rise and so the world rises.
Yes. It's not even an explanation. It's the one brute fact there is, I am. That's the one thing that cannot be denied. The question is whether there's anything else. Now there seem to be other things, but these other things only seem to exist because if they really existed, why do they not appear in sleep? What exists must always exist, and part of that is there's no existence other than awareness. To say something exists independent of awareness is again a false supposition. How can we know does it have any meaning to say something exists but you're not aware of? Oh, no, science has this theory about the Big Bang. No one was aware of the Big Bang. Well, we're aware of it now as an idea. What else is the Big Bang but an idea? There's maybe lots of, they maybe have, those who believe in the Big Bang may have lots of what they consider scientific evidence, but actually there's no evidence for it at all. Why? Because there's no evidence that anything exists independent of our perception of it.
That's interesting. So one thing that you're pointing out here is that what is real for Advaitins and for Bhagavan is what is eternal, unchanging, permanent, blissful, self-shining, all these sorts of things. So it's a little bit confusing to say like this table isn't real. In a way, what we're saying is it isn't permanent, it isn't unchanging, because most people would say this table is real, but they don't. Maybe it has couldn't you say it has a lesser degree of reality? Would that be more comfortable?
That is the usual Advaitic concession. It has vivaharika satya. It has transactional or functional reality. Yes, this table is real. I can put a cup of coffee on it. I can rest my PC on it. I can even sleep on it if I want. So definitely, so long as I seem to be this body, all these other things seem to be real. But what does real actually mean? It's something is real only if it actually exists. If it merely seems to exist but doesn't actually exist, therefore it's not real. That's what real and unreal mean, particularly in Advaita philosophy. So according to Advaita, all these things, all phenomena, and the seer of the phenomena, namely ego, they seem to exist, but they don't actually exist. Why don't they actually exist? Generally, philosophers will say existence is not a property, which is true. But if we, for the purpose of an argument, if we take existence as a property, properties are either inherent or they're incidental. An inherent property is something that is let me think of an example. Okay, yeah, I know one, but I think it's often used in Advaita. You have a hot potato. Heat is not the nature of that potato. Where does the potato get its heat from? It gets its heat because it was in hot water. That water, heat is not an inherent property of that hot water. Where did the water get its heat from? It got it from the pan. That pan is made of stainless steel or something. Heat is not an inherent property of stainless steel. So where did that get its heat from? It got its heat from the fire. Heat is an inherent property of fire. You cannot have fire without heat. That is, it's the very nature of fire, but it is not the very nature of stainless steel cooking pans, nor is it the very nature of water, nor is it the very nature of potatoes. Because a potato, now it's hot, but it's not always hot. Heat doesn't belong to that potato. It's not an inherent quality. So likewise with existence, if we take, for the sake of this argument, I'm not saying that existence is actually a property, but for the sake of this argument, we can view existence as a property. If something is inherently existent, it will always exist. If something exists only at some times and not at other times, existence isn't an inherent property. It's borrowing its existence from something else. Just like the potato borrows its heat from the water, and the water borrows its heat from the pan, and the pan borrows its heat from the fire. Anything that has only a temporary existence is borrowing its existence from something else. So all phenomena, they only have a temporary existence. Where do they borrow their existence from? Only from the ego who sees them, but they exist only in the view of the ego. So they depend upon ego for their seeming existence, but even this ego is not real because it doesn't always exist. It exists in waking and dream, it doesn't exist in sleep. That means existence is not an inherent property of ego. It's borrowing its existence from somewhere else. Where does it borrow its existence from? From that which actually exists. That is Sat-Chit. It borrows not only its existence, it also borrows its awareness, because what actually exists is awareness. That's why it's called Sat-Chit. Sat means existence or being or reality. Chit means awareness. So that Sat-Chit, that is the real awareness. That alone is permanent. That real awareness is what is always shining within us as I am, as our fundamental awareness of our own existence. Ego borrows its existence and awareness from that I am. That is, ego is not I am, but it borrows its existence from I am, and it borrows its existence and its awareness is the substance. It borrows its substance from I am, and it borrows its form from a body. But it is neither the body nor is it the substance, the Sat Chit. That's why Bhagavan calls it a formless phantom in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu.
I saw a man said to you the other day that it was a...
This is a logical argument to show that why we say ego and phenomena are not real. They're not real because though they seem to exist, they do not actually exist. Why do they not actually exist? Because if they actually exist, they couldn't at any time not exist. But there are times when they don't exist. That is, they appear only in waking and dream and disappear in sleep.
A lot of people say that God is everything and nothing, or Buddha nature is everything and nothing. Yes. I've heard you talk about this different times, but when I first started talking with you, I was much more inclined to say God is nothing, and you are much more inclined to say God is what is. And to me, saying nothing is indicating everything. So, and a lot of people will talk like that. Could you address that?
We can get into these. It's very easy to get into mere arguments on words. We need to go beyond the words. God is the only thing. He's not a thing like other things. Generally we use the term thing to refer to objects. God is not an object. So in that sense, he's no thing. He's not an object. But he's not nothing. There is something that is, there is something that actually exists because we're aware of our existence. So if there wasn't something that actually exists, there couldn't be an awareness of something that actually exists, as Bhagavan says in the first Mangalam verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. And as he says in verse 23 of Upadēśa Undiyār, that which actually exists is itself awareness. Why? Because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists. To know what exists is awareness, he says. What is the reasoning there? If there was an awareness other than what exists, it would be a non-existent awareness. So how can a non-existent awareness be aware of what exists? So what is aware of what exists cannot be other than what exists. So Sat is Chit, Chit is Sat. That is the basic argument there. And what is it that is aware? In the same verse 23, he says, awareness alone exists as we. That is, we ourselves are that Sat Chit. So that is what is actually real. That we cannot deny. That is something, not nothing, in one sense. But in another sense, it is no thing. It is not an object. We can't point out and say, oh, this is Sat Chit. This is what is real. Because it is not an object. It is not even the subject. It is the reality underlying the subject. That is, the subject is that which is aware of itself as I am this body, in other words, ego. The Sat Chit is the I am portion of the ego. That is the substance of the ego.
Another thing I'd like to talk about is, I made some notes on this one. These are paraphrased. The greatest help you can render the world is self-realization. The only duty is to abide as self. And the way of repaying Guru is to remain as self.
Yes.
Can we talk about that?
Yes, we can explain this. There are various ways we can explain this. That is, self here means our own real nature, pure awareness, what we actually are. Being as pure awareness, so long as we remain as pure awareness, we are not rising as ego, and therefore we're not bringing this world into existence. And therefore, we're not bringing any problems into existence. As soon as we rise as ego, we bring so many problems into existence. We bring the whole world and all its problems into existence. So remaining as we are is the greatest service we can do to the world. In other words, not dreaming a dream world is the greatest service you can do to that dream world, because any world is full of problems. I don't know if anyone has found a world yet that is free of problems. They talk about some heaven or something, some very blissful, but there will be some problems or other there. Can heaven last forever? If it's now we're not experiencing heaven. Supposing we experience heaven, supposing we die and we go to heaven and we're with God. It all seems very perfect, but it had a beginning, and what has a beginning will also have an end. It cannot be permanent. What is permanent must always be in the past, present, and future. So even heaven, there cannot be such a thing as a perfect world. We can try to imagine it, but you cannot possibly imagine a perfect world. There will always be some imperfection there. So the best service we can do to the world is not rising as ego, and therefore not bringing any world into existence.
And then what about
most
the best way of...
Most people's experience of the world is neither heaven nor is it hell. It's somewhere, it's a mixture of both.
Purgatory, if you will.
Yeah.
Now, the other part of that is the only duty is to be as you are, is to abide as self. But then this one is very interesting to me because I have a natural gratitude towards our guru. And so this makes me want to do this even more and not slip into pramāda, forgetfulness of self, which is the best way of repaying the guru is to always remain as self.
Yes, because when we rise as ego, who is guru? Guru is our own real nature. When we rise as ego, we get ourselves into trouble. Our real nature, pure awareness, never sees us as other than itself. But what our real nature loves is just to be as it is. So since our real nature doesn't see us as other than itself, it loves us to be as we are. But when we rise as ego, we no longer experience ourselves as we actually are, and we therefore experience all sorts of troubles. So it is then necessary for our real nature to appear outside in the form of guru to tell us, turn back within. Know yourself. If you know yourself, then all your problems will be solved. So we are unnecessarily creating problems for guru by rising as ego. So the best service we can do to ego, to guru, is not to rise as ego. The whole purpose of guru appearing in human form is to turn our attention within and thereby stop us rising as ego. So doing what the guru told us is the greatest service we can do to guru.
Awesome. I have a whole lot written down, but I was kind of hoping to just go, this one, I wanted to mention this. This is interesting to me. So in Advaita, we use, I termed it violent, but language such as destruction, annihilation, extinction, and so forth. Yet I mean, these are, harsh terms really, but unless you know that what's gained through that is bliss, but at the same time, the path is believed to be gentle, peaceful, and pleasant. So there's a real dichotomy there, apparently. Can you talk about that?
Whatever words are used to describe this subject are pointers. So we have to understand them in the context in which they're used. Our real nature is infinite love. What is violent? What is harm? Himsa means harm. From where does all harm, himsa, start? It starts only with the rising of ego. The most violent action of all is our rising as ego. Because when we rise as ego, we bring harm into existence. So all the bad in the world is brought into existence only by our rising as ego. So that is the most violent action. Surrendering ourselves and thereby annihilating this ego is the most gentle and loving action there is.
See, I know some younger people follow our path, and in fact, I was emailing with a younger friend who is Catholic, and she pointed out that she hinted that she didn't like this thing, self-annihilation. And then in the next sentence, she said, we must decrease that he increase. And I was like, you've just said the same thing. But she didn't like that it was like a violent type of annihilation.
You say she's a Christian?
She's Catholic.
So but then she doesn't agree with Jesus then?
What does he say?
Because what did Jesus say? Unless you die and are born again, you cannot That is, in order to attain the eternal life, what is that? I can't remember. Something like he who would save himself loses himself. He who loses himself gains himself. There are so many things in the Bible where Christ clearly indicated, but we must face our own destruction in order to know ourselves as we actually are. That's how I would interpret it. But I mean, they're indicating that we have to die in order to live.
Yes, that's true. We have to be.
If you would follow me, take up your cross and follow me. What does the cross symbolize? In the time of Jesus, the cross was the most violent means of execution used by the Romans. It was extremely cruel and extremely violent. So when he talked about taking up your cross, what does that mean? The cross is a symbol of death, of execution, of violent death. So he's asking us to take up our cross. That means we have to embrace our own annihilation in order to know ourselves as we actually are.
There's more than that. They saw it as a birth into new life, like Polycarp when he was martyred. He saw it as, dang it, I can't remember his name, but they see it as a birth into new life to be martyred.
Yes. Well, it is. So the ego has to be martyred in order to be born as Brahman.
Yeah, regarding that, I was thinking about if you're trying to raise children and it's like, darling dear, I love you, but you need to destroy your mind and eradicate yourself. And it's like, I don't think this is going to work, you know.
No need for the children to eradicate themselves. If you eradicate yourself, the whole problem is over. You don't have to go to the people in your dream and tell them you must eradicate yourself in order to attain salvation. If you, the dreamer, eradicate yourself, in other words, if you wake up from your dream, then you have solved all the problems of that dream world. You have saved the whole, the entire humanity in that dream world is saved by your waking up.
Yeah, I heard, I think I read it myself, but I heard David Godman mention that Bhagavan was sort of kind of laughed at the idea, the Mahayana Buddhist idea of Bodhisattva, because it's like, they're a dreamer in dream world, saving dream people.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will continue dreaming in order to save all the other people in my dream. It's okay as a religious idea. It's okay. It's a nice idea, but there are good souls who come again and again. It's a nice thing to believe. And there are some good souls who are very concerned about this world, but they're still souls. They're still in ignorance.
Do you have disagreements with David Godman? I hate to bring this up. It seems to me that you're teaching vastly different things at this point, now that I'm very familiar with you. And I feel like a lot of my ignorance has been sort of coming through that line of teaching versus coming to you.
Many things David Godman says I agree with, but I think sometimes I listen to some people refer me to a video or something where he's spoken, and I occasionally listen to such things. I am often struck by how different his understanding of Bhagavan's teachings is from mine. Many things, that's not to say that we disagree on everything. Many things I agree with him, but some things I think how he takes it in such a way. This is not a new thing. David and I have been friends for 45 years. We both came to Tiṛuvannamalai 45 years ago, so we've known each other since then. From the beginning, he and we agreed on many things, but there were always things where we disagree, where we understood in quite different ways. But that is natural. I mean, the Bhagavan himself said, according to the purity of the antakarana, that's according to the purity of the mind, of the inner instrument, the same teaching will reflect in different ways. So we each have to understand it according to our own light. But I base my understanding largely upon Bhagavan's original writings, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Nāṉ Ār, Upadēśa Undiyār, Atma-vichara, Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai. I mean, these original writings, Bhagavan is given the very heart of his teachings. For me, that is where I base my understanding on what Bhagavan has said. But it seems David Gottman has also read the same things, but he seems to have taken quite a different meaning from some things. Why, I don't know.
Because from him came Papaji, and from him came, to a large extent, I think, Nisargadatta. And I had sort of in seed form, like kind of a dislike, personal dislike of studying Nisargadatta, and definitely Papaji. And then when I was able to converse with you, it's like you have a very similar feeling, basically, that these people are not, because when you compare them to Ramana, it's like, for me, very different, and it seems the same to you.
Whatever again, Nisargadatta, for example, superficially, many things he says are very similar to Bhagavan's teachings, but there are many things he says are really strange things. He talks about beyond consciousness, and he talks about Brahman and Parabrahman, as if Parabrahman is something other than Brahman. There's many things about him, but I don't know, because he didn't speak English, he spoke Marathi. In the first book of English book about Nisargadatta that came out was I Am That. That was recorded by Maurice Friedman, who had been with Bhagavan. So in I Am That, Nisargadatta seems to be more like Bhagavan. His teaching seemed to be more like Bhagavan. But in later books, some of the books by Jean Dunn and so on, it seems to be a completely different understanding of Advaita. It could be to do with problems with translation or what, I don't know. And I'm not saying anything about the state of Nisargadatta. He may be a great soul, whatever. I have nothing against him personally, but his teachings, they certainly lack the clarity and the simplicity of Bhagavan's teachings. Bhagavan's teachings are, people who compare Bhagavan's teachings with others, I have really not understood. Bhagavan has brought something, though what Bhagavan is teaching the essence of Advaita, the same Advaita that's been taught in the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita and all the commentaries on them and the commentaries on the commentaries and all the texts explaining them and all the philosophy. Bhagavan brings the very heart of that, but he's presenting it in a very new and very fresh and very simple and clear manner. He removes, he has bypassed a lot of unnecessary philosophizing, which has confused the whole thing. The essence of Advaita is very simple. You are that, tattvamasi. As Bhagavan says in verse 32, I think, of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, when the Vedas say, or when the Upanishads say, you are that, what should we do? We should investigate who am I, and thereby we should remain as we actually are. That is the import of tattvamasi. If I am that, then who am I? Should be our response. It shouldn't be to think, oh, I'm that, am I? Then I'm not this body. I'm not this body, I'm that. I'm not this body, I'm that. Most of the philosophizing within Advaita is lots of very nice arguments why we are not this body and why we are that, why we are pure awareness and not this body. But merely philosophizing, merely thinking I am not this, I am that, as Bhagavan says, it may be a good aid, but it's not the vichara. Vichara means we have to turn our attention within. So Bhagavan has made Advaita so simple and so clear. Bhagavan has brought something very fresh and very revolutionary. That is what Bhagavan has revealed about the nature of ego, for example, which is the key to understanding Bhagavan teaching. That is something which hasn't been made so clear in any of the ancient texts. But ego itself is the root of everything. But there's no ignorance other than ego. Ego itself is ignorance. So Bhagavan has brought something very new. So people who compare Bhagavan to Nisargadatta or to this person or to that person, I really question whether they've understood how deeply they've understood Bhagavan's teachings. So, but I know many people like Nisargadatta and things, but often when people quote Nisargadatta, it's either that it's a very poor translation and the translation is creating confusion, or there was a lot of confusion in what he taught. I don't know. I'm not in a position to judge that because I don't read Marathi, and I think very little actually was recorded in Marathi. I think most of it was recorded in English. That is one thing. About this Papaji, Punja, I have yet to see anything but in Punja, but would make me think that he has understood Bhagavan, or that he is in any way representing Bhagavan. He seems to have, that is this so-called neo-Advaita ideas seem to have been largely spawned by Punja. And he seems to, he seemed to have expressed ideas which are very akin to neo-Advaita, which is quite different to the pure Advaita taught by Bhagavan. I mean, it's a very, very extremely superficial interpretation of Advaita.
For my part, I don't even identify as an Advaitin. I just say I'm a Ramana Bhakta. You know, to me, they're different in my view, you know.
Bhagavan would not agree with you there. You're neither an Advaitin nor a Ramana Bhakta. You are what you are. You are I am.
If I had to describe myself to someone, you know, I don't really like Advaita, which might sound strange.
The whole point of Bhagavan's teachings, we are questioning our identity. So why should we bring in a new identity? Oh, I was a Catholic. I was born as a Catholic, but now I'm an Advaitin. Now I'm a Ramana Bhakta. It's just, there was a devotee of Bhagavan called David McKeever. He was a Scotsman, but he was born in Mumbai. And I believe he never left, he lived all his life in India. In his young age, he was attracted to the Theosophical Society. And in the Theosophical Society in those days, it was just at the start of J. Krishnamurti's career. And Annie Besant and Bishop Leadbeater were trying to present him as the new Messiah. So David McKeever at first was part of that. I think it was called the Order of the Star. And then J. Krishnamurti broke away from the Theosophical Society, and he denied being Messiah or anything. Then he was for some time a follower of J. Krishnamurti. Then he got interested in other things, and he was dabbling in so many things. And he came to know about Bhagavan. He came to Bhagavan. Once, having been visiting Bhagavan for some time, on one of the occasions when he came to Bhagavan, he had grown his beard, he had dyed it with henna, and he was wearing a long robe because he had become a Sufi. So he came and he bowed before Bhagavan and offered some dates or something, according to his Sufi customs. Bhagavan looked around at the people in the hall, and seeing that nobody recognized him, says, don't you know who this is? This is our McKeever. So some years later, McKeever went away and spent a summer in Kashmir. And when he returned from Kashmir, he was dressed as an Orthodox Brahmin. He had a sacred thread and he had a Panchakacha dhoti. And he came and he did a Shashtanga Namaskaram to Bhagavan. And he got up and said, Bhagavan, I've become a Hindu. And Bhagavan looked at him and smiled and said, who has become what?
That's beautiful. I love that.
Just replacing one identity for another. What's it matter whether you consider yourself to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a J. Krishnamurti follower or whatever? What is common to all people? The theists and the atheists, the Buddhists and the Taoists and the Christians and the Muslims all agree, I am. That is the only truth, Bhagavan says. Just be I am, nothing more, nothing less. So that's pretty simple. Bhagavan is so simple.
So then it's just difficult to grasp for basically everyone or something.
It's difficult to grasp so long as we have attachment to other things. To the extent to which we have attachment to other things, we are unwilling to let go of those other things. If we're not willing to let go of those other things, how can we grasp I am? In order to grasp I am, we need to let go of everything else. It's our unwillingness to let go of other things that makes it seem difficult to grasp what Bhagavan is talking about. But all we need to grasp is I am, and let go of everything else. the whole problem will be solved.
I mentioned Robert Adams to you in an email. I know he's very popular for some people, and you pointed out an article written by Katja Douglas or Kitty Osborne about basically Robert Adams was a fraud, basically. Did you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think she, I don't know when I first heard of Robert Adams. I think he became known only in the 90s or so, or maybe a little bit earlier. But nobody in tiṇṭṛamala or Ramanashram had ever heard of Robert Adams. And it was said that he was claiming that he had been 3 years with Bhagavan. And people said, no, if he had been 3 years with Bhagavan, we would have known it. I mean, you couldn't, a young foreigner couldn't have lived for 3 years in tiṇṭṛamala without anyone noticing. So from the beginning, when I first heard about him, it all seemed a bit dubious. But I was never much interested. I mean, so many people claim so many things. Then people started to share with me things like, Robert Adams says this, Robert Adams says that, and isn't this like Bhagavan's teaching? Some of the things he says are superficially like Bhagavan's teachings, because no doubt he's read talks and other books. So he's got some sort of understanding of Bhagavan's teaching. But there are many things he says that people have quoted to me that seem to me to be quite either in some cases contrary to Bhagavan's teachings, in other cases they show a lack of any depth of understanding, any clarity of understanding of what Bhagavan is actually talking about. But so I've never been impressed by the so-called teachings of Robert Adams. About a bit more than a year ago, someone told me, because that was before the pandemic, the local Ramana group here in London, Ramana Maharshi Foundation for Ramana Maharshi Foundation UK, they had monthly meetings, and I used to go and attend those monthly meetings, and usually I was asked to talk at the monthly meetings. During one of the breaks in one of those meetings, someone came up to me and said, "Oh, you know, people say that Robert Adams was never with Bhagavan. David Godman has written or has said or something that Katja Osborne said she remembers Robert Adams, and her father had lent him a car and some other things." When I heard that, I was vaguely surprised about that. But I didn't give it much thought. I mean, I just thought that's very strange. It didn't seem very plausible to me, but someone had said, David Godman had said this. So a few months later, someone wrote an email to me about pointing out on some video, David Godman had written this in a comment or something, I think. So when someone pointed this out to me in some context, I can't remember what it was, and asked me, "Do you think this is true?" I said, "Well, I first heard this a couple of months ago, and this seems to me very strange. I find this improbable." But I said, "I'll check with Katja." So I wrote to Katja through a mutual friend and got back a message saying, "No, definitely, this wasn't their family never had a car, and she had never heard of Robert Adams, and whatever claims he makes about their family are all false." And she said also that the claims he makes about Bhagavan are false, because she had also heard, like I'd heard, these stories. And then some, anyway, someone was writing something on a comment on my blog. So I then pointed out, I said, "No, actually, Robert Adams, there's no evidence that Robert Adams was with Bhagavan. And Katja Osborne has denied all these stories." And later, Katja wrote this article in the Mountain Path, because too many people, once David had written this, of course, the story spread, but Katja Osborne knew Robert Adams and that her father lent him a car. So Katja finally wrote an article in the Mountain Path, in which she wrote about this in the context of integrity. But a guru without integrity, a guru who's basically telling false stories, is not to be trusted. It was basically the theme of our article. And I have to say, I agree with that. I mean, if he is a jnani as he claims to be, then why would he want to tell false stories? Because some of the stories he tells are patently false. Even in his, I think there's thousands of pages of transcript of his talks. And it's been pointed out to me in at least, in 2 different places in those transcripts, he's given 2 completely different accounts of his first meeting with Bhagavan. So which one is true? The whole thing just seems, and other people have written to me all sorts of other stories about him, saying that he was a very dubious character and things. I'm not interested in all that. All I know is, it seems, as far as I'm aware, the stories he told about his meeting Bhagavan and Bhagavan coming to visit him in the cottage he was staying in, Osborne's compound, they're all pure fabrication.
Katja wrote that Bhagavan never even crossed the road and never went into their home.
Yeah.
And she said that Robert gave that ashram a Jeep, and she said the Jeep, they didn't have a Jeep or a car until just recently.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. So
that's interesting.
But anyway, we need not be interested in these other people. The only relevance to this is when people ask, is Robert Adams a reliable exponent of Bhagavan's teachings? I have to be honest and say, he seems to me to be a rather questionable character, let's say.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
There's nothing about any of his so-called teachings but strike me as that he had any clear or deep understanding of Bhagavan's teachings.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like he read talks, basically.
Yeah. And he understood it in his own way and added his own whatever.
I see. Okay. Oh, I have a question. I've been talking with a friend I haven't spoken with in a long time, and she is very interested in like therapy and self-help and the new age and social sciences. And I personally don't have a high opinion of any of these things. And I'm just wondering if you would talk about sort of the therapy, self-help, new age, constant improvement movement, what's your opinion on all that?
I have no opinion. The truth is,
okay.
I mean, it's a bit like this question about Robert Adams or Punja or any of these things. Why should we even think about these things? Bhagavan has given us a clear and simple path. It's up to us. If we're interested in all these things, our mind is still going outwards. That's fine. If it's I mean, we will not come to this path until we have got tired of going outwards. If we look at the world, there are so many beliefs people have, so many opinions people have, so many theories people have. Maybe true, it may be false, who knows? Why should we? What we know is our basic knowledge, our basic awareness of ourselves, as I am Michael or I am Sean, this is a false awareness. So whatever else we know is known by who? By the one who is aware of itself as I am Michael or I am Sean. That one who is aware of itself as I am Michael, I am Sean, is itself false. So why should we worry about whether other things are true or false?
My interest is I want to make sure people are following a good path. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I'm just supposed to abide. But my interest is making sure people are following a good path, rightly or wrongly, and then also correcting mistaken understanding. What we should be
concerned about, are we following a good path?
Yeah.
According to Bhagavan, the good path is the path that goes within. Going outwards is, even if you go outwards to do good things, it's still not the best path because you're just perpetuating the illusion. The illusion, I am this person, I am Sean, I am Michael, I am this body.
That's true. That's one thing I got from Bhagavan, is a definite sense that I should turn within and not sort of proselytize it all, which is lovely, because that's just more action, more karma, more doing, more bondage.
Exactly. We have to decide in this life. Our life is very short. We are here for what, 60, 70, 80, 90 years, or maybe a bit more, but life goes by very quickly. So what are we here for? As Bhagavan says, Vande Velepa, attend to that for which you've come. What have we come to this world for? We've come to this world, I mean, the only benefit we can make of this life of ours is by turning within and knowing what we actually are. This is what we should attend to. It is the nature of the mind to take interest in other things. That is the very nature. I mean, Vishaya vasanas are the very nature of ego. Ego is always curious about the outside world, about the politics and about this and about that and about different philosophies and different ideas and different and social injustices and what's climate change, all of these things. All these are things, these are endless things. The world has never been a perfect place. I'm not saying that we of course, when we are aware, for example, climate change is definitely, human activity is definitely having a major impact on our climate, and that is already having a major impact on people, and it's going to have more and more impact as time goes on. Knowing that, we should try to live in such a way that we ourselves have minimum impact on the environment. We can't stop others driving their cars or flying their airplanes or doing whatever they're doing, but at least we should try to keep our carbon footprint to a minimum. In other words, we try to follow a path of ahimsa, trying to cause as little harm as possible. But beyond that, that is the forces that are driving this climate change, the economic forces. What is behind these economic forces? It's human greed. And what is the root of human greed? It is ego. So the root of all these problems, all the problems in the world, ultimately it comes down to ego. So we cannot deal with other egos. Let us first solve the problem of our own ego. Because so long as we have an ego, we have likes and dislikes, and to a greater or lesser extent, we are selfish. And we need to set our own house in order before we set other people in order.
That's true.
So if we're serious about following this spiritual path, we need to be one-pointed. There are so many things that can distract our attention. There are really pressing issues in this world: climate change and the rising of the far right and racial problems, and there's so many problems in this world. But we shouldn't contribute to these problems. We should try to avoid these problems. But what can we do about all these things? The world will always be like that, because if this world is real, we are one ego among 7 billion egos. Egos who are aware of themselves as I am this body. There are so many other egos who are aware of themselves. I am this cow, I am this tiger, I am this elephant. So there's so many egos. So all these egos have their own self-interest. And these are having so much impact on everyone else. So we cannot sort out this world. Of course, it would be nice if we lived in a world where there was social and economic inequality, where people didn't have amass huge amounts of wealth while other people are living in extreme poverty, where the resources of the world were shared property. This was shared equitably among all people, and everyone was given a fair chance in life. That would be very nice if we lived in such a world, but when has the world ever been a perfect place? So many people have come to try and set the world right, and problems have never ceased. One problem morphs into another problem. So if we are serious about following this spiritual path, we need to lose interest in this world. It's not that we don't care. We do care, but what can we do? The best help we can do to this world is turning within and knowing ourselves.
I used to think about ways of improving the world, and I came down to 3 that I was really happy with. I don't want to mention them because one I think might upset some people, even though I know you agree with it because you've told me before. But it really just comes down to Bhagavan, or even more simply, egolessness, because then you naturally want to share your resources. You're not harming things as much, you know.
Bhagavan is another name for egolessness.
Exactly.
What we call Bhagavan, Ramana Maharshi, the person, is a very human embodiment of egolessness, which is our real nature.
That makes sense. If you wanted, I'm just looking at my list here. This is once again about morality and the world. I'm sorry to do that since it's not completely relevant, but so long as we take ourselves to be this ego. This is important. A person, at least in modern democratic societies, is a bearer of rights. If we're saying that you are not a person, what sort of obligates the state or others to not harm you legally or lawfully or ethically?
People should have rights. The rights we have are rights we give ourselves. I mean, in a wild situation, in a jungle or somewhere, what right does the deer have? If a tiger comes and chases the deer and catches it and kills it, is that an infringement on the deer's rights? It's just the law of the jungle. So all rights are human constructs, but it's good. If we are to live in a civilized society, we need to give each other rights. We need to respect each other as people. So if we on spiritual path, our aim is to find out what we actually are. What we actually are is not a person. But so long as we and others take ourselves to be people, as people, we should be very basic rights we should have. We should all have right to food, clothing, shelter, in the modern world, and education. There's certain things that should be available to everyone. Medical care. Medical care shouldn't be just for those who've got money. It should be for everyone. So at least there should be. If we were to live in a better society, we should respect. Everyone has a right to the basic necessities of life: the food, clothing, shelter, and not being exploited to work beyond a certain limit. That there are many people who are so poor, they work it, for example, in sweatshops. They have to spend 18 hours a day working just to live. That is people should have a right to the basic needs of life without having to virtually work as slaves forever. So there are so many things we can say about this, but the world is never perfect. I mean, if we live in a world where people are fair to each other, so much the better, but we can't expect that always to happen. I can't even quite remember what your question was now.
It's fine. It's on the subject of being a person. Like I recently wrote with a person who talked about, for them,
Sean is a person. Michael is a person.
Yes.
The spiritual question is not, are you Sean? Am I Michael? That is what we need to be investigating.
I think there's a way of saying I am Sean and still being what I really am. You know, I don't think that they have to be distinct. There's only one I.
Yeah, that is it. When our attention is going outwards, we are aware. You are aware of yourself as I am Sean. I'm aware of myself as I am Michael. And therefore, because I take Michael to be myself, I have so much care about Michael. I think Michael should have rights, and Michael should have justice and everything. And since I want Michael to have justice, then everyone else should have justice, because I would feel unfair if I have all these rights and other people don't have. So we want a fair and equal society. That's all. Yes. When our attention is going outwards, all that seems to be, all that is naturally the case. But our aim is not to go outwards. Our aim is to go back within. When we go back within, then we are separating ourselves from the person we seem to be. There's no point in coming out and saying, I am not Michael. That's meaningless. Who is saying I am not Michael? It's Michael who's saying I am not Michael. Or the ego that is aware of itself as I am Michael, saying I am not Michael. So for acting in this world, for all intents and purposes, so long, what is acting? It's only the person who's acting. It's only body, speech, or mind that is acting. So that body, speech, or mind is the bundle is what's called a person. So long as we're acting, we are people. But it's not what we really are. Our aim is to investigate what we really are.
I think there's sort of positive ways of framing personhood that won't like entail denying rights. Like, for example, for legally, if you're not a person, they don't owe you rights. So a cow is not a person, so we don't have to protect it. A fetus is not a person for some philosophers, such as Peter Singer. We don't have to protect a fetus. So when you don't have personhood, you don't have protection legally.
In what way is a cow less of a person than we are? A cow is not a human person, but it's still a person. If you've got cats or dogs, or if you live with any animals, every animal has its own personality, its own likes and dislikes and foibles. So they're as much people as we are. But the body may be different, the mind may be different, but essentially they are as much people as we are. But of course, we in the past, Europeans, and not only Europeans, I mean, it's happened in so many cultures throughout history, people have considered it justified to have slaves. In the recent history of Europe and North America, the Black people who were brutally kidnapped from Africa and brought to North America and to the British colonies in the East Indies and other European colonies, that's the Portuguese and Spanish colonies in South America, they brought slaves. And they justified that as, we white people are superior, Black people are somehow inferior, so it's perfectly justified for us to do this. I mean, people will believe whatever's convenient for them. So it's again, sorry, I've lost the track of what I was thinking, but I mean, all these things which are blatantly injustices, people find ways of justifying even the greatest injustices. But by this idea of I'm superior, they're inferior. But who is superior, who is inferior? Just because your skin is a particular color, just because your racial type is a particular racial type, just because you're of European origin, how does that make you any superior to people of African origin? We all originally came from Africa, generally believed, so we're all in the same boat. But there's the color of people's skin or their racial type, all these have nothing to do with it. But we use these things, we use these differences to claim superiority over others, and thereby to justify exploiting others.
Including animals or preborn.
In the same way that we treat animals, yes. Yeah, that's what I was saying about this slavery. That is, Christian people, good Christians, they thought that sometimes I think there was even a question whether Black people actually have a soul or not. Even if they have a soul, well, it's then our duty as white people, we have to save their soul. So making them slaves is a way of saving their soul, because otherwise they'd be in Africa and they'd be following all sorts of other non-Christian religions, and thereby they'd be destined for eternal damnation. So we have actually saved them by making them slaves. People have so many ways of religious ways of justifying atrocities. So in the same way, like in the very, very recent past, it's not so distant, it's not such a distant future, just 1 or 2 centuries ago, a lot of people thought slavery was perfectly justified for one reason or another. In the same way nowadays, we treat the industrial production of of meat production and milk production. It's done on an industrial scale, treating the cows and other chickens and pigs and other animals as mere commodities. I mean, we treat them even worse than we treated slaves in the past.
Yeah. So I guess I'm trying to say, I think for many people, the idea that we're not a person is extraordinarily unhelpful. And it's really just sort of a really deep, very, very deep, very, very subtle for like a very mature person to hear you are not a person. Otherwise it should be, yes, I love you, dear, you're a person. You need to fulfill your personhood. This cow has personhood. You know, we need to, you know.
So long as we're looking outwards, everyone is the person, including ourselves. But when we look inward, who is the one who experiences itself as I am this person? That is what we need to investigate. That ego is what we need to investigate. If we investigate that ego will dissolve, and everything else will dissolve along with it. So ultimately, it all comes down to, are we interested in going outwards or interested in going inward? So long as we're concerned about the world and the injustices in the world, there's plenty to keep us occupied. For countless lives, we can continue fighting for justice in this world and opposing those who we consider unjust. But the world will always be as it is.
But of course, there has been relative improvement, wouldn't you say, or no?
Yes, in a sense, yes. Like nowadays, we don't have, well, there is still slavery, but it's not on the scale that it was earlier. But nowadays, the slavery is more, it's more covert rather than overt. But I mean, sweatshops, for example, are a form of slavery. Due to poverty, people have to work 18 hours or so a day in often very bad conditions. And we all agree, oh yes, sweatshops are very bad, but go to the high street, go to the shops. Most of the clothes we buy are produced in sweatshops. So there's still injustices in the world.
That was something I was a little bit curious about.
We are fortunate. We are born into a relatively affluent section of society. I'm talking society of the world as a whole. There's the majority of people in the world are materially worse off than we are. Just by virtue of the countries we live in, we are better off than a lot of people. But even in our countries nowadays, there are homeless people, there are so many injustices. So things may be better in some sense, but people are still people.
That's true. So it all goes back to egolessness, basically, is the solution to all of it.
That is the only solution. That is the only, well, yeah. That is the only complete solution.
And unless I'm in some sort of position of power where I can do something, which I don't really plan to be, I don't think I will be, it's no good for me to rise and say, you all should be doing this. I should just abide as I am and be peaceful. And that's what I should be doing.
Even people who are in power, there's so many people who have good intention, but when they come to power, there's so many forces. Now, Joe Biden, for all appearances, he seems to be a well-intentioned person. But how much will he actually be able to do? How much? I mean, there'll be so many forces against him. He has to work with other people. There are so many other politicians and so many economic forces and so many things. He may do some good, but it will all be very relative and very insubstantial good. That is, if you do some good in the world, it's so easy for someone to come along and undo the good you've done. So it's really, what power do any of us have? It's a bit of an illusion to think I have power, I'm able to do.
Yeah, and then you can have power and do destruction like the last man.
Yeah, exactly.
When I first heard Kamala was running for president, I brought it up with you because I said I thought she had a decent chance of winning, and there she is, VP. Now, you said Kamala is a common name in India, didn't you?
Yes. It's Kamala means a lotus.
Oh, cool. That's cool. So, this is important to me. So typically when we're talking about the body, it's really kind of, from my view, kind of overly put down. Like Bhagavan Ramana has referred to it as like filthy and so forth. But when we realize, in fact, the body isn't separate from our true nature either. Like it's just that. There's just that. But what is, I think I'm still seeing multiplicity, right? So there isn't even a body. Nothing's even there whatsoever. It's just Bhagavan.
The problem now is the body is innocent, as Bhagavan said. Bhagavan sometimes said about people who do physical austerities in the name of penance or tapas or something. Bhagavan said it's like if a person has done a crime and they're sitting on a chair, it's like beating the chair instead of beating the person. The chair is innocent. Likewise, the body is innocent. The problem is ego. It is ego that identifies itself as this body. Why it is sometimes said this body is filthy is we so lovingly take this body as I, and so long as we take a body as I, we've got this idea of dirt and cleanliness. We all like to be at least relatively cleanly and to avoid dirty things. We consider excreta as something dirty. We don't want to touch it. So we've all got this idea. But where does that excreta come from? It comes only from this body. There's one verse in which Bhagavan said, those who take this body as I are worse, implying those who take a human body as I, are worse than pigs, because the pig eats filth and it excretes filth. We eat pure food and we excrete filth. So in that sense, for that reason, the body, it is pointed out where the body is actually filthy. We have so much attention to this body. We try to keep it so clean. We have bath and all these things. But what is this body? It's a massive filth. If we have an accident and we are crushed under the wheels of a bus or something, it'll be a big mess there, a lot of blood and guts and everything. That's this body that we take to be ourselves. Even our precious brain, if something comes and hits our head, crushes our head, that'll be a big mess. Someone will have to come and clear up the mess. So we have so much attachment to this body, so we prefer to overlook how filthy it is. In that sense, it is said. But really, the body, we don't have to worry about the body. The problem is not the body. The problem is the I that is aware of itself as I am this body. That I is ego. That is what we need to investigate.
Sounds good. So,
and by investigating it, we surrender it.
In Christianity, they talk about sort of like the world was created by God, all that stuff, and it's good. And it seems to me that that's sort of the point that we kind of get to at the end of Advaita, which is like everything is jnana, not meaning everything multiplicity, but everything, there's just jnana. So it's all God, in a metaphorical way, it's all God's creation, it's all beautiful, it's all lovely, but as what is, but not multiplicity, just Bhagavan.
What it is beautiful. Yes. Because what it is only jnana.
Right.
But we don't see it as jnana. We see it as all this. Jnana means pure awareness.
Right.
That alone is real. But now we are seeing pure awareness as all these forms. So we're not seeing it as it is. If we see it as it is, then we will see its real beauty.
So that's a big misunderstanding. I was just watching some other people online yesterday, is when we talk about what is, that's noumenal, spiritual. What is, I am, is when we say I is, we mean what is, we mean I am. We don't mean this table, this chair, this bike or whatever.
These other things are what seem to be. There's a difference between what is, in the sense of what actually is. When Bhagavan talks about Uḷḷadu, Uḷḷadu means what is or what exists. But it doesn't mean what seems to exist, what actually is.
And there's only one thing that's permanent.
Yeah, what actually is, what I was saying earlier, only that which is permanent and unchanging can be real, because everything else, its existence comes and its existence goes. So existence isn't an inherent property, it's a borrowed property.
That was a really good argument, by the way. I'd never heard that before.
I think it's a common argument given in Advaitic texts.
I think it's coming from a Western framework. It sounds to me like sort of God is the original creator and that everything partakes of it, or Platonic.
Yeah. It's not saying God is the original creator. God is the original substance.
Analogous.
Creator, according to Bhagavan, creator is only ego.
So you don't see the world as multiplicity, you just see Bhagavan.
I see the world as multiplicity. I'm still in ignorance.
But Bhagavan just sees Bhagavan.
Bhagavan just sees Bhagavan.
Now, Michael, are there two eyes or one eye?
Only one.
Then how are you seeing multiplicity?
Because this ego is ego is the pure I am mixed with adjuncts. So ego is always aware of itself as I am this body. As such, it is unreal. But what it really is just I am. So ego minus adjuncts is pure awareness. Ego, the pure awareness mixed with adjuncts is ego. The substance is the same. Whether gold is formed into a necklace or a bangle or a ring or a brick, it's all gold. So the substance, the one real substance, the Uḷḷadu, the Mayporul, is of Sat Vastu, is I am. That alone is real. Everything else is unreal. So in ego, there is an element of reality. That's why Bhagavan always said, we are ego, that is, there is only one eye. That is, if you mistake a rope to be a snake, the rope and the snake are not two different things. There's only one thing there. The snake is nothing but a misperception of the rope. So there's only one eye. When we misperceive this eye as I am this body, then that is called ego. But it's actually nothing other than the pure awareness.
That makes sense. I have a bunch of things written down. The next thing I have to leave in like 15 minutes. The next thing, or wait, 9 minutes. The next thing I have written down is, would you like to talk about your biography at all? Your history?
The biography is a biography about Michael. Not that there's anything, there's nothing very particularly interesting about Michael, but that is, if we are following the spiritual path, we need to learn to give up interest in people. We need to, first person we need to lose interest in is the person we take ourselves to be. So long as we're very interested in this person, the attachment is there, and we are still, so we are trying to deny our existence as a person. Not outwardly. I'm not going to go around saying, I am not Michael. That would be meaningless, because that would be Michael saying, I am not Michael, which would be gibberish. That which is aware of itself as I, is now aware of itself as I am Michael. But Michael cannot be what I actually am, because I'm aware of Michael only in waking, or in waking and dream at most. In sleep, I'm not aware of myself as I am Michael. Michael is something that appears in waking and dream and disappears in sleep. So Michael cannot be what I actually am, because I exist in all three states. So we are trying to separate ourselves from this person. So just like we are trying to give no importance to the person we seem to be, we shouldn't be giving importance to other people. People are so, is this person a jnani? Is that person a jnani? They're so interested in other people. We shouldn't be interested even in the person we seem to be.
When I first contacted you,
jnana is not a person.
When I first contacted you, I don't know if you remember, I was like, I think you're a jnani. Why don't you say so? And part of that, why I was saying that was because I had been influenced by David Godman, going back to the earlier point. But this is interesting to me. You say God is only one, jnana is only one, jnani is only one, guru is only one. So it all comes back to I am.
And you are that.
Very cool. The last thing I'd like to talk about is loneliness. That's come up a lot. I just wanted to say for myself, I've really appreciated seeing, my fellow students talk to you. I feel a bit like I'm having community, just getting to see their faces and interact with you. And that's been a real joy for me. I feel a little bit bad for the people. I noticed a couple comments, feeling like they're alone following this path. But for me, I feel a sense of community talking through here. So that's been nice for me.
Yeah, but one provides the help that we need in different ways.
Well, I better get going, but
right.
I was hoping to get into some more deeper stuff, but it looks like we got way more into the world again. But
yeah. Next time we'll try not to get sidetracked.
Sorry about that. I guess that's just what my brain does, right?
It's the nature of the mind is going outwards. That is ego.
Okay,
welcome to the world of ego.
Exactly. Well, at least theoretically, it's for the pursuit of good, right? The pursuit of others' good, whatever. Yes. But that's not
Bhagavan says, what is good to the extent we remain subsided, to the extent we sink low, that means the ego subsides, to that extent it is good. He says in the final paragraph of Nāṉ Ār.
And that is my duty out of gratitude towards my guru, is to abide as I am.
Yes.